Hey everyone, I'm Trey Johnson, and this is episode 3 of our Bleeding Kansas series. Today, we'll be answering this essential question by talking about the people who settled Kansas. Who are the groups and individuals that came to Kansas territory, and why did they make the journey? The Kansas-Nebraska Act officially opened Kansas for settlement on May 30th, 1854. But clearly, people had been living here long before that. Indigenous groups like the Arapaho, Cheyenne, Comanche, Kansas, Kiowa, Osage, Pawnee, and Wichita are all considered to be native to the area that would eventually be known as Kansas. Originally, Kansas was viewed by Europeans and Americans as the Great American Desert and undesirable for white settlement. They totally thought it was fine for Native Americans, though. With the United States' increasing desire to expand its borders further, Kansas suddenly wasn't considered an uninhabitable desert anymore. Imagine that! Even before Kansas territory was open for settlement in the spring of 1854, groups with varied political interests had formed to encourage settlement in the new territory. Remember, the Kansas-Nebraska Act infuriated many Northerners as it repealed the Missouri Compromise, throwing out the rulebook for how free enslaved states would be created from the lands of the Louisiana Purchase. Both pro- and anti-slavery advocates saw the writing on the wall. Kansas was to be a battlefield for the future of slavery, and all of this was taking place before any of these groups set foot in Kansas territory. The New England Immigrant Aid Company and other similar groups formed to promote and support free state settlement to create a Kansas without slavery. The first organized group of New Englanders arrived in the territory in July of 1854 and founded the city of Lawrence, making it the focal point of abolitionist activity. Before the end of the year, Cyrus K. Holliday and others established the city of Topeka as another free state community. Meanwhile, Missourians, fearing an exodus of enslaved people to a potentially free state next door, poured across their border with Kansas. David Rice Atchison, a pro-slavery senator from Missouri, and brothers John H. and Benjamin F. Stringfellow, quote, urged their people to resist the abolitionist plot to surround their state with free territory. These men helped establish the pro-slavery town of Atchison. Pro-slavery Missourians founded Leavenworth around the same time. The groups we most commonly think about when it comes to Bleeding Kansas are abolitionists, pro-slavery supporters, and free staters, so let's break down each one of these. As we learned in the last episode, abolitionists wanted to end slavery and emancipate, or free, enslaved people. Abolitionists like Ellen and Isaac Goodnow moved to Kansas territory because they felt that slavery was morally wrong. Ellen described Kansas as being too good, quote, for bondage or for the oppressor's rod ever to be raised over it. Isaac emigrated to Kansas before Ellen with the New England Immigrant Aid Company, and once Ellen arrived, she wrote letters encouraging her family to emigrate as well. Now there were other abolitionists that took their belief even further, radical abolitionists like John Brown. John Brown saw slavery as the ultimate sin and that violence, even murder, was justified in ending it. It's easy for us today to think that most people moving to Kansas would be abolitionists, or at least sympathetic to their cause, but that really wasn't the case. At this point in U.S. history, abolitionist beliefs were considered radical by many Americans. Northerners were willing to tolerate the evils of slavery for the sake of maintaining the status quo and the economics of the time. Slavery was technically legal, after all. However, when Northerners began to see their own rights erode in Kansas for the sake of slave owners' rights, that's when things started to change. But we'll get to that a little later. David Rice Atchison argued that, quote, the prosperity or the ruin of the whole South depends on the Kansas struggle, fanning the flames of tension that would soon take over the territory. Atchison encouraged Missourians to cross the border illegally to vote in Kansas elections. Many Southerners felt that slavery must be extended into Kansas at all costs. After all, nearly 20% of all enslaved African Americans in Missouri lived along the Kansas border, and if Kansas became free, they worried that enslaved people could easily cross the border to Kansas to seek their freedom. Additionally, Southerners feared that stopping the expansion of slavery into Kansas would threaten the future of the institution of slavery itself. Jefferson Buford, a slaveholder from Alabama, attempted to recruit pro-slavery men to move to Kansas territory. Buford's expedition was made up of around 400 men gathered mostly from the states of Alabama, South Carolina, and Georgia. These men all agreed to settle in Kansas in return for free transportation, a year of guaranteed support, and a homestead of 40 acres of first-rate land upon arrival. The newly arrived pro-slavery group was immediately enrolled into the Kansas Territorial Militia and eventually ended up sacking the town of Lawrence and burning several Free State businesses there to the ground. After the looting and burning had ended, Buford claimed that he had not come to Kansas to destroy property and condemned the course of actions that had occurred in Lawrence. Eventually, the men he recruited lost interest in Kansas and returned home. Even Buford himself gave up in the cause and returned home to Alabama, where he promptly died. Although the title Bleeding Kansas makes it sound like everyone emigrating to Kansas was looking for a fight, most of the people who came to Kansas Territory were seeking land and opportunity. They acquired land for farms or for businesses and homes in the new towns being established, taking advantage of the Preemption Act of 1841. It allowed an individual to claim up to 160 acres of land and pay $1.25 per acre once the public land survey was completed. It sounds insensitive, but many Free Staters were simply taking advantage of cheap land and didn't really care too much about the morality of slavery. Some people like Samuel Reeder just wanted to come to Kansas to farm. He said, quote, "Rich, cheap farmland was the principal incentive that lured me on from my Illinois home. I had heard and read much concerning the political troubles in the territory, but the question of a free or a slave state was a secondary consideration with me at the time. In fact, I had given little thought to the subject, viewing the peculiar institution as a great wrong, but leaving its adjustment to older and wiser heads." So essentially, Reeder said, "Not my problem." Many other Free Staters also felt this way. Others, simply put, didn't want to see slavery expand into Kansas because they didn't want to compete with the free labor that slavery would provide. Some Free Staters didn't want black people to be able to live in Kansas at all, which is confusing since free literally makes up half the title Free State. So free didn't always mean welcome. But what about the people who had the most to gain or lose in this entire struggle? Free and enslaved African Americans. Governor Andrew Reeder, the first territorial governor of Kansas, ordered our first census in 1855, just a year after the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. There were 343 African Americans counted in total, 192 enslaved and 151 free. While this seems like a small number, there were only 8,601 people in the entire territory. Out of those, only 2,905 were white male residents that were eligible to vote. The remaining 5,696 were women, children, and immigrants. American Indians were not counted. It's important to point out that slavery in Kansas was different than the chattel slavery found in the Deep South. Most slaveholders in Kansas had one or two slaves, generally women and children who performed domestic work. Now, this isn't to say that it was a better form of slavery. They still had no contract, no pay, and no rights. Acts of violence were still perpetrated against both enslaved and free black people in Kansas Territory. Even free African Americans with freedom papers were still captured and sold back into slavery. Congress hoped to wipe their hands clean of the slavery debate through popular sovereignty, making white eligible voters choose whether or not Kansas would allow slavery. Who could have foreseen the immense political turmoil that this would cause? Next episode, we'll discuss the numerous conflicts that arose when the differing ideologies of these groups came to a violent clash. We'll see you next time.